When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come!" I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. The fourth horseman of the apocalypse is symbolic of death and devastation. The horse's pale color in the original language is literally pale green or yellowish green, signifies sickness and death. The fourth horseman of the apocalypse will bring further warfare and terrible famines, along with awful plagues, diseases, and attacks by wild animals. A fourth of the world's population will die. When the fourth seal is opened, we see that four different things acting together wipe out a quarter of Earth's population, which is currently over 8 billion people. The four things causing death on a massive scale are sword, famine, pestilence or plague, and the wild beasts of the earth accompanied by persecution. The Greek word translated into English as pale for the color of the fourth horse is chloros, from which we get such English words as chlorine, chloroform, and chlorophyll. The term describes a greenish-yellow color that is characteristic of a decomposing corpse. Permission is given for a fourth of the population of the earth to be killed by the sword, famine, plague, and wild beasts. The rider on the back of the horse is named Death, which is another unique characteristic, as it is the only rider that is named, like we earlier explained. The Greek word translated into English is the common word for death. Still, this term could also be meant as death through pestilence or disease. This fourth horse and rider brings death by pestilence or plague. Let's think about each of the things that happen at the opening of the fourth seal. First, the passage states that some are killed by the sword. Asides that, the sword signifies death through violent means. Killed by sword would then mean that a level of violence would be going on, resulting in people killing one another, possibly because of a breakdown of civil order due to a lack of food. Some have openly proposed a plan of intentional depopulation, citing an ideal number of 500 million people. From the 1960s, some key world players have begun to focus on what they saw as the problems of an exploding population growth. They believed that overpopulation was the primary cause of environmental degradation, economic underdevelopment, and political instability. It may be possible that world leaders would try to reduce their populations by using any means at their disposal. The famine that started at the third seal is also continuing, and the plague also adds to the death of a quarter of the population. What could the epidemic be? Is this a further virus that breaks out on the earth? What would happen if a more virulent pestilence or plague were to come? Food supply to the affected areas will be greatly reduced, thus causing the famine to be worse. Our passage in Revelation also talks about people killed by wild beasts. How can that be possible in our day? In the Old Testament, God warned Israel that if they were unfaithful to him, he would release 4 categories of death upon them. He said in Ezekiel 14:13-21, "My 4 dreadful judgments, sword and famine and wild beasts and plague, to kill its men and their animals." While this passage may refer to wild animals, there may be another interpretation of this word. The Greek word used is therion, and although it is mainly used for animals, it could also be indicative of people who have let their inner beast nature dominate their lives to such a degree that they behave like wild beasts. When people dominated by selfish greed or hunger find themselves backed into a corner, they will act in a predatory manner out of a beast-like need for preservation, especially in a time of famine when men find it difficult to feed their families. Consider the 2 scriptures below that speak of men behaving like beasts. Psalm 57:4. "I am in the midst of lions. I lie among ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords." 2 Peter 2:12. But these men blaspheme in matters they do not understand. They are like brute beasts, creatures of instinct, born only to be caught and destroyed, and like beasts, they too will perish. The four horsemen have interesting applications to our lives today. In fact, the whole of the Apocalypse tells us something. It tells us in clear terms that God is just. He will not tolerate sin to any degree, nor will he compromise his standards for any reason. We can also see the unrelenting love of God through these things. God could as well cast everyone into the lake of fire immediately after the rapture happens, but the tribulation period is an extra period of mercy for those who through suffering will come to realize the error of rejecting Jesus as Messiah. Those who refuse to take the mark of the beast will eventually join God's kingdom, although they will go through intense levels of pain and persecution for choosing Jesus. What is most interesting, or perhaps terrifying, is that the four horsemen of the Apocalypse are just precursors of even worse judgments that come later in the tribulation. However, our response as believers should be what Apostle Paul describes in 1 Thessalonians 5. In addressing their behavior, he simply told the Thessalonian Christians that they should be who they are, and he says the same to us too. God has made us sons of the light and sons of the day. The time when we were of the night or of the darkness is in the past. So now we simply have to live up to what God has made us. What does that mean? He goes ahead to explain by saying, "This day should not overtake you as a thief." Paul means that this should not happen for the believer who lives according to their nature as a son of light and son of the day. We believers should and will be ready for the return of Jesus Christ. In some respect, the coming of Jesus will be a surprise for everybody because no one knows the day or the hour. But for Christians who know the times and the seasons, it will not be a complete surprise. No one knows the exact hour a thief will come, but some live in a general preparation against thieves. Those who are not in darkness, who live as they are all sons of light and sons of the day, these are ready for the return of Jesus. But if we are in darkness, perhaps caught up in some of the sin Paul warned against previously in this letter, then we are not ready and need to make ourselves ready for the return of Jesus. Because we do not belong to the night nor of darkness, our spiritual condition should never be marked by sleep. Spiritually speaking, we need to be active and aware, to watch and be sober. Paul used a different word in this letter for sleep than the one used for death, for the sleep of death in 1 Thessalonians 4:13, and the word sleep is here used metaphorically to denote indifference to spiritual realities on the part of believers. It covers all sorts of moral and spiritual looseness and indifference. Sleep speaks of ignorance. Sleep speaks of insensibility. Sleep speaks of no defense. Sleep speaks of inactivity. In a sermon on this text titled, "Awake, Awake," Spurgeon showed the folly and tragedy of the sleeping Christian with three powerful metaphors. The first one is about a city which suffers under a plague, with an official walking the streets crying out, "Bring out the dead! Bring out the dead!" All the while, a doctor with the cure in his pocket sleeps. The second is about a passenger ship which reels under a storm and is about to crash on the rocks, bringing near certain death to the hundreds of passengers. Meanwhile, the captain sleeps. The third talks of a prisoner in his cell who is about ready to be led to execution. His heart is terrified at the thought of hanging from his neck, terrified of death and of what awaits him after death. All the while, a man with a letter of pardon for the condemned man sits in another room and sleeps. Apostle Paul also admonishes us to be sober. Sober doesn't mean humorless. It has in mind someone who knows the proper value of things and therefore doesn't get too excited about the things of this world. The person who lives his or her life for fun and entertainment isn't sober. In commanding sobriety, Paul didn't have in mind the sort of people who stamp down all enthusiasm and excitement for Jesus, promoting what they think is a more balanced way to live. Paul himself was an enthusiastic follower of Jesus and was often accused of religious fanaticism. So as believers, our mindset in these last days is to be sober and watchful, diligently doing what he has committed to us, that we may bear much fruits as we wait for the coming of our Master.